Democracy in Chains is the intellectual history of our present political moment. It provides the backstory for the rise of transforming American politics through a look at the life and the ideas of James McGill Buchanan. I call James Buchanan the critical missing piece because we need to understand James Buchanan's ideas in order to make sense of the strategy that is being pursued by this billionaire-backed radical right. I never set out to write this book. I did not go looking for James McGill Buchanan. I'd never heard of him when I started researching this book. I had just finished another book, and I learned about the school closures in Prince Edward County, Virginia, in reaction to Brown versus Board of Education. And then in the course of digging into that story, I came across a footnote about Buchanan's work. And then someone alerted me to another footnote that contained a report that Buchanan's Virginia school had a more lasting impact on Chile than Friedman's Chicago school. So then I was really curious, and I began to dig into the Buchanan story as well. After he died in January of 2013, I finally, by September, was able to get into his papers. And that's where my hypotheses were confirmed, and I found some really interesting stuff.
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. I'm Michael Brooks. We're broadcasting live from downtown Brooklyn, USA, where left is best as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Lech.
Hello.
Chief economist and quick on the draw, David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic is in the digitosphere, in the ever-growing, ever-aggressive, ever-expanding TMBS universe. On this week's program, crew and host of the Way With Anoa, co-editor of the Progressive Army, Anoa Changa, joins us. We're talking about the crucial governor's race in Georgia, the next escalation on the Republican war on civil and voting rights, and can a Stacey Abrams win be an indication, a placeholder, a precursor of a radically transformed Southern Democratic and left politics? One that can create an actual American democracy. Plus, shout out to the animal kingdom. We have a dope story that has some poachers on the losing side of natural innovation. Plus, we have a gem, a Griscom Economic Minute, the GEM system, socialist methodology for winning in the modern economy. A Regulate with Matt Lech. In the post-game, Kanye's in Uganda playing nice with yet another dictator and talking Jurassic Park, and you know that I have to bust out my MLK Kanye routine. Plus, potential food shortages because of Brexit, Mark Zuckerberg sentenced to the gulag, all that's in the post-game. And we're going to touch on this Elizabeth Warren thing. Dunk on Anna Navarro, who had a absolutely horrifying, terrible, but oh God, so amazingly awesome tweet and idea for Elizabeth Warren. That and much, much more on this week's Michael Brooks Show. Thank you, DJ Danarchy. Thank you, all of you. Let's get to it. The Duke University professor Nancy MacLean, who we saw there in the cold open, has written one of the most important books of our time. I've been privileged to be able to interview her in the past on Two Dope Boys in a podcast, and she will be hopefully again with me on this show. It's called Democracy in Chains. Democracy in Chains traces a history going back to segregationist Southern foreign policy maker and ardent and anti-majoritarian pro-slavery advocate James Calhoun, through the libertarian propagandist and academic James Buchanan, to the Koch brothers who funded Buchanan's work. This is the origin of the infamous Mercatus Center at George Mason University in Virginia, and whose ideas have been distributed through, at the very least, Latin America, but influenced global policy making through the neoliberalization of institutions like the World Bank and IMF and structural readjustment packages that have benefited U.S. corporations and hand-tied developing countries across the globe. This is a vital history for understanding, of course, not only the rise of fascism aided by Chicago School, in this case, Chicago School, not Virginia School of Economics in Brazil with Bolsonaro and the embracing of it by the Wall Street Journal and the Brazilian business community and middle class, but also for what's happening here, especially in light of the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. These are people whose ideological foundations rested on a recognition that, going back to Calhoun, that if you wanted to, in their minds, protect capitalism, you needed to protect it from democracy. This is the actual policy counter the libertarian myth of freedom. It's about the freedom of small propertied minorities to do as they will at the expense of anybody, whether it be African Americans, women, or labor unions. In the 1950s, and a major influence on Buchanan's work was the understanding that Brown versus Board of Education was not only something that they opposed vigorously on its own terms because they were opposed to civil rights, but because it had implications for federal interventions to propagate the protection, ironically, given the propaganda of libertarians, individual rights across the board. That's actually what it was about. The contest was one that said freedom was about the states being free from a national sovereign to do basically whatever they want. Slavery, apartheid, disenfranchisement of women, labor, and large swaths of the population. They defined freedom as the federal government doesn't interfere with our repressive systems. And this is not just a handy talking point that was developed by segregationists in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It goes back to Calhoun. It goes back before the Civil War. That recognition was coupled with a concern of the business classes exemplified by the Koch brothers, that same impulse to ensure rights, which is the other side of this equation, the notion that a national authority could supersede state authorities if groups and individuals were being systemically oppressed, as they were in the apartheid South, as labor unions, in fact, are as well in the South, in a different way, although also and far less encompassing, obviously, but also an important one. This is the politics of capitalism as the expense of all else, but they have an advantage, not only because of all of the money behind them, but because they have an ideological coherence. The court system, which rules on behalf of corporations and the oligarchy, props up the corporations who fund the politicians who generate the policy frameworks that get fed to the courts and ratified by the courts. So the Federalist Society works informally with the Mercatus Center, works informally with all Republicans in Congress. They also shrewdly exploited disingenuous cultural interventions to make economics cultural. This is one of the problems we're having right now, and why the distinction between people who just want to have a cultural conversation and those who just want to have an economics conversation are failing in a full analysis, because the right, under the leadership of these people, already recognize that things like school vouchers, which are less trendy now, could be stand-ins to both, as they attempted to rebrand themselves from being arch segregationists, even though in fact they still are on the merits, but show that they supposedly were concerned about African-American opportunity. Well, what better to use that than as a Trojan horse against public education? The deficit as a Trojan horse, a public conversation on morality, became a Trojan horse against the entirety of federal government spending to benefit the middle class and the poor, not federal government spending writ large, obviously. There's always government. It's just who is it working for, even in the most supposedly anti-government vision. Democrats and the liberals, center-left, failed in fighting back, partially because they didn't understand, or maybe they were paid to not understand, by their own ideological blinders, the ways in which this all fit together strategically. And that is why a sort of piecemeal approach of small interventions, and I'll cover the range here, whether it's an unambiguous, unapologetic advocacy of the positions we need on labor, on single-payer healthcare, on breaking up banks, on a mass reclaiming of wealth in this country, on the fact that billionaires are antithetical to democracy, on the fact that huge swaths of this economy need to be publicized and democratized, but also in a positive and affirmative way, an overarching vision that recognizes that white supremacy, that systemic sexism are profound social ills that affect and work on all of us, and we all participate in, well, winningly or unwittingly. The structural macro critique that can feed a vision of our view of approaching the courts, our view of approaching policy, and our view of an intellectual framework that provides an alternative to this is the only way of beating it. The right thought structurally, while the center left was thinking tactically. And while we can talk obviously about the fact that corporations compromised everybody in the whole process, the Democratic Party, with the advent of neoliberalism, sold out its traditional constituencies to Wall Street and Silicon Valley, while the fact that the old social democratic arrangements of the 1960s most likely will not work today in a highly globalized economy, which is why we need a genuinely mass global solidarity in order to advance even a genuine social democratic agenda. The other missing piece was that the right thought in terms of systems and long-term strategy, and the left thought in terms of how to navigate within systems that the other side created. And any project, whether it's the socialist one that we favor, whether it's a social democratic one that others favor, whether it's even a sort of broad-based progressive coalition one that others favor, and obviously all of these share a lot of traits, you're going to need to have the type of synthetic and integrated strategic vision that the right had, or we will continue to lose. And it's already profoundly late in the process. They have been winning. They have been gutting democracy. They have been gutting the small social advances of both the social movements of equity coming out of the 60s and also the vital economic gains of the New Deal and the Great Society, the fusion of which, as articulated by people like Adolph Reed, is the necessary future of politics. Okay, guys, please jump in.
I'm actually thinking about doing a Democracy in Chains reading group book club sort of thing for Literary Hangover.
You should. It's a really important book.
It is, and to be honest, I actually sort of didn't give it the full attention at first because I was a little bit influenced by the, I would say, libertarian smear campaign.
The libertarian meltdown. It was unfair. It was an unfair book.
And
some very familiar to talk
yeah, exactly. And some people might think we're being unfair to some of the commenters, but I gotta say, in looking into it, it appears like the main problem people have with her is that she's guessing what's in Buchanan's heart and that he's racist. And how could he be racist if he has this acquaintance that's an apartheid? You know, he's anti-apartheid economist, right? And all these sorts of things, which is not really the point to me. The point is that he had an economic system that perfectly meshed with the goals of those sort of people who wanted to maintain white supremacy, shed a shadow in using finance and capitalism. And that appealed to him, and that I think Nancy MacLean is a fantastic writer, and people should really go to that book as a sort of very rich narrative of that sort of project. I think
from the South to Chile to apartheid, there's no answer to anything that she wrote. It's all you're mean and you're not reflecting their intentions, as you said. Which, I mean, that's an IDW trope. That's a libertarian trope. We can stipulate. Look, I don't believe this, frankly, but I'll stipulate across the board. Every single libertarian intellectual that advised dictator Pinochet, who was mass murdering people in stadiums, who propped up economic systems in the South, in America and South Africa, that were designed off of main casts of people being fully disenfranchised as a, if you want to put it in Marxist terms, just a sub-labor group that was abused and exploited as part of how they did capitalism. And also, yes, let me just debunk one other one. People that treated them as second-class citizens at a cafe counter, as an example, they still got their business. They just had to sit elsewhere. This myth and nonsense that, oh, it wouldn't be in the capitalist interest. Right. It was in everybody's interest. They had literally a captive class of people who both needed to pay them for their services, plus could be disenfranchised from any type of basic civil, democratic, and labor rights. There's a lot of money to be made that way. And even if you Rand Paul might be a good example of this. Let's speculate for a second that Rand Paul, personally in his heart, does not think that people should be mistreated because of the color of their skin. He still, as of several years ago, was saying that the greater question of liberty in the question of civil rights in the 60s was Howard Johnson's owner being able to dictate who could get served freely in their shop versus the people who couldn't get housing, were murdered by the police, terrorized by the KKK, couldn't vote, and couldn't labor organize, and had to still pay those same businesses for services and products that they were disenfranchised from. He thought the first thing was the greater question of liberty. And let's take these people at face value. If they are not racist and morally opposed to it, then they're, in fact, even more demented for having this ludicrous worldview. I love Scientology except for the cult part.
Yeah, and it's like the thing is when a lot of these libertarians talk about increasing liberty, they're not interested in increasing liberty. They're interested in increasing tyranny over the marketplace. So when they're talking about Johnson, he's wanting to increase his ability to be a dictator within his own realm, within his own hotels. And you look, closely at what happened though with the right wing. And especially this libertarian consensus that sort of really dripped into American society. I mean, you got to remember, like in the 50s, most economists were Keynesian. That's right. And they put so much money and effort into trying to shift that worldview to what the fact that even in the 90s and the 2000s, Democrats accepted very ridiculous right wing talking points. And
Alan Greenspan was the head of the Fed, who everybody praised. The guy literally was part of the Ayn Rand cult.
No, exactly. Well, yeah. Remember when he said he had a flaw in his ideology?
Right. I had a flaw in my worldview.
But I mean, it's something that we really need to understand why it was so successful, and why we really need to fight back, not just in winning power, but also in destroying that framework and that kind of conversation that's been happening. Because
that's the Gramsci dimension, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's the counter-hegemonic narrative, and that sounds really fancy, but it literally is having a full counter strategy. That's why things like triangulation, even if they won in the short term, could never be durable because you're playing on someone else's terms.
Because then look also what happened with triangulation. Every victory that the Democratic Party, the quote-unquote left, won was in a sense a victory for the right in many ways because they enacted the right wing.
Definitely true in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So they took over that rhetoric, they incorporated it to give them power, and then they acted out on it. If it's intentional or not, that's the result of these things. And that's why the right has been very smart in the U.S. at understanding that cultural political and academic dimension of politics, which so often we forget when we try to talk about things as if they're happening individually. History isn't something that's given, it's something that's made. And it's something that's really important that we remember that as we build, left-wing power and coalitions going forward.
Absolutely.
By the way, I need to comment on the technical stuff first. We will have this uploaded with proper audio. We had an echo problem.
Trouble with that?
It's fixed now, but we'll make sure to check that beforehand. But anyway,
is this up on screen? Sorry, guys. We actually had a bunch of weird. There's something going on here, tech wise.
But Forrest, shout out Forrest, who's helping us out with the YouTube. He'll have that clipped with proper audio. We'll get that for the YouTube channel.
Get on that YouTube channel. Subscribe. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube.
Lewis Hyman, who we've had on Majority Report recently, posted a really long, worthwhile thread on Sears and how Sears sort of had this. Basically, I'll just start in a second. The stores were not self-service, so the black customers would not have to wait, and then would have and then would have to ask the proprietors to give them goods, often on credit because sharecropping. The landlord often owned the store. In every way, shopping reinforced hierarchy until Sears, the catalog, undid the power of the storekeeper. And Southern storekeepers fought back. They organized catalog bonfires in the streets. So they just wanted that inefficiency so much. But it reminds me of this argument I got in with on Twitter with a guy who was trying to suggest that it was the government forcing storekeepers to be, enforce apartheid in the South,
Right.
Against their will. Which is, I mean, man, if there's anything more insidious but like nakedly stupid, it's that.
And this false distinction, I'm sorry, just like, I very rarely, I guess I've just sort of excommunicated most libertarian people from my life, so I very rarely get into these debates anymore. But I think it's really important to mention too is like this kind of false dichotomy that between like the market and the government, between business owners and the government, is really false throughout American history. To act as if these are two separate classes when they've been very much intertwined, and to act as if the government of states, especially in the South, was separate from the business community throughout the Southern history. That's patently false. The entire Southern government for years was all about one thing: was about promoting Southern industry, which was the slave industry, which was very much the business
That's
interest.
Calhoun.
Yes, exactly.
That's James Calhoun.
Exactly.
That's part of the origin story right there. All right, let's do. This is a fun shout out. The printer is not agreeing with us, but we have to play our song first. That's creepy. It's incredible. Shout out.
I can't get that Eminem song out of my head now.
I like this better than Eminem though. But it totally. I mean,
It is that.
It is that.
It's
Don't
that
tell.
mode.
Don't tell the algorithm.
Oh, by the way, we have new Danarchy for interstitial.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I'll bust that out in a little bit.
Danarchy's a fuck. DJ Danarchy, everybody. He's a
Beast.
genius. He's a beast. We love him. Thank you. Today's shout out, we want to shout out the animal kingdom, and we're going to put this up on screen when we have a chance. It's a story. It's Science Alert. Science Alert, which was reported by the BBC. Look up David Slavic in your Gmail. It should be the latest one. Or I ammed it to you. I ammed it to you, Matt. It's right under the sound we're using with Anoa. So let's throw this on screen, David. This is old, actually, but why not? This is from 2016. Young gorillas have learned how to dismantle poachers' traps in the wild. Days after poachers killed a young mountain gorilla, which is really depressing way to start this, in Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park in 2012, researchers spotted something remarkable. Two 4-year-old gorillas were working together to dismantle similar snares in the area. This is absolutely the first time we've seen juveniles doing that. And I don't know of any other reports in the world of juveniles destroying snares. Veronica Vercellio from the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund's Karasake Research Center in Rwanda told National Geographic. We are the largest database in observers of wild gorillas, so I would be very surprised if somebody else had seen that. The snares are set up by poachers. This is, of course, a major issue and a something that is an active challenge in areas like Rwanda to protect these gorillas. But in this dope shout out, the gorillas have done it themselves. So shout out nature and
need
ingenuity.
Gorillas to start, breaking into oil refineries.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have some other assignments for you. Like, gorillas need to start, like, tearing up pipelines.
I have a
It should be like that shitty Michael Crichton movie, The Congo. It's like where the gorillas can fight. They just start, like, taking down, like Blackwater planes and shit.
I have a late honorary mention for shout out today. We have Kissinger was at NYU and students were protesting him.
I can't believe that this old evil bastard's still out here.
Henry Kissinger, on behalf of the International Criminal Court, you are a war criminal. You have committed genocide against the peoples of the world.
Yes.
You're a war criminal.
Throw him
You're as
out.
bad as the Nazis. You don't belong here. I have my First Amendment rights. All power to the people.
And also,
apparently it's going on more.
Who's
too.
that fucking moron saying,
You were given an award because your crimes were over Kissinger. 45 years.
You know what people should do though is get like some. I don't want to recommend Hitchens, but someone who's labeled off Kissinger's crimes and just read that, right? Like just have the content there to just incite while they throw you off.
Yeah, just read it.
You get no points for being extemporaneous, but this is all great because apparently they're timing it out so they can get into it. Oh, here I am. Yeah, I'm in my chair. And then so they're outside Bopes. That's
good.
So
that's good.
Don't run the government? Are you telling me that you're not a war criminal?
That's how it should go.
I'm more offended by these people saying throw him out.
Yeah, look, Kissinger. I don't give a crap. I'll clean up my language. I don't give a crap that Kissinger doesn't have a platform anywhere, to be honest.
Oh yeah, fuck that guy. He should be in prison. Although I think prisoners should have platforms, so it's tricky. All right, yeah. So actually, I do think you should have a platform. All right, we're going to do a little pitch, and then we're going to talk to the great Anoa Changa of the Way of Anoa and TMBS
We'll
show
put the new
crew.
Danarchy into
All right,
the
let's check it out. New interstitial. I buy it. I definitely buy it.
Fits perfectly.
Thank you, Danarchy. Shout out. We continue to grow as a show. We have crossed 1,700 patrons. Of course, the next big goal is 2,000 patrons. Huge amount of extra content. Just got a review the other day that said that we had the best Patreon extra content in the game, which I was very honored to hear. Those histories, those setups of ideas and histories from Africa to Gramsci to the history of the super elite to the Middle East, these really are going to give you a lot of ground for understanding how the world works and how to engage in activism, how to engage in arguments. And I think it also, the goal really is to actually enact and prototype what is a real global solidarity. What really is a proactive and affirmative vision of the kind of socialism, the kind of democracy, the kind of just basic human empathy that we're, even as we, fail and make mistakes and, we don't, obviously no one knows all of the answers, but we are working towards, we're grappling towards. And there's a really powerful community growing out of this show as well. There's calls with me at the 21 and above levels. I promise one soon when I get back from this conference in Idaho. Woke Bros with Waz and I. And I'll just say live shows are now like legit in the works, as are, I think we're doing hoodies. We'll be right back with Anoa Changa. Patreon.com/TMBS. Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is TMBS show crew and host of The Way with Anoa, which everybody should subscribe to, as I do, on my podcast subscription service of choice, as well as become a patron of, also the co-managing editor of the Progressive Army, Anoa Changa. Anoa, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Anoa, we're going to start with a piece of sound that you tweeted out involving the Georgia's governor's race, which you are very strongly involved in. Stacey Abrams has a real chance here, and Brian Kemp, who is one of America's premier apartheid politicians, is using voter suppression, voter disenfranchisement, strategic white supremacy to fearmonger and lie and literally eliminate votes his way to the governorship and against this incredibly impressive run by Stacey Abrams. This is Brian Kemp. You tweeted this out earlier. Here he is talking with the ever correctly named Steve Doocy on Fox News. We're going to play that, and then you're going to tee off on it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well, it means she wants illegals to vote in Georgia. I mean, this is a shocking development in the campaign while she was campaigning.
Sorry. It's frozen?
The frozen, so I'm going to just boot it up one more time.
Reset this. Sorry, guys. We're having a bit of technical difficulties across the board tonight. My apologies. Although, I will say, Anoa, great phone connection. Excellent phone connection.
Well, guys, we had enough notice, so I am here in the house on Skype, not out in the, I think the last time I was on, I might have been downstate in the sticks.
You were.
So,
I remember. Yeah. But I am thrilled. Okay. Let's play this. We got it now.
Well, it means she wants illegals to vote in Georgia. I mean, this is a shocking development in the campaign while she was campaigning. With Elizabeth Warren, she actually said this. Her network of groups actually filed a lawsuit that says the same thing in the lawsuit. And look, early voting starts in Georgia today. I think hardworking Georgians should decide who their governor is, not people here illegally like my opponent wants.
Yeah, but you're Secretary of State. It's not legal to, if you're in the country illegally, to vote, is it?
No, absolutely. It's against the law and it's against the Constitution, which makes it even more shocking that she would say that. But when you file a lawsuit, she's trying to get a pick of a liberal judge that will just make a ruling to order this. That's what the lawsuit's asking. That's why this is so extreme and a radical position, quite honestly, for my opponent. It's not just her saying this, but her, groups that support her that she helped create that have filed a lawsuit. And that's why we need hardworking Georgians to know and urge them to get out and vote and let them decide who their governor's going to be.
You know, Mr. Kemp, your opponent says you're trying to suppress the vote by holding up thousands of voter registration applications. What do you say to that?
Oh, that's a smokescreen trying to hide her radical views. Those folks that are on the pending list, all they have to do is go to the polls, show their photo ID, and they can vote. Again, this is just a distraction from her view of her groups filing a lawsuit to get non-citizens to vote in the state of Georgia. We're not going to allow that. We're going to have secure, accessible, and fair elections in our state. And by the way, they're not talking about the fact that we have more registered voters on our rolls now than we've ever had. And she voted against online voter registration that I helped create that's improved our voter rolls and has more people participating in the process.
Okay. Anoa, what did she actually say, and explain all the ways that this man is lying, please?
I mean, what's so funny, I'll just note this, what's so funny is, as they note on the Fox News on the segment, but of course it's Fox News so they don't go in for the kill with this, he's the Secretary of State. It's ludicrous when Republicans make these accusations, but this dude is in charge of the voter rolls. He's in charge of the elections, including his own, and he's afraid of, quote unquote, of non-citizens, of undocumented folks, quote unquote, criminal illegals, as he calls them, which is a horrible phrasing or whatever. But like, he's acting like he's really afraid that this could happen, but he's the one in charge. So if anything like that were actually to happen in large numbers, and we already know from all the different studies and results and stuff that have been done, that this is like, if it does happen, it's so negligible. It's rarely ever found anywhere in the country that this happens. But let's say this actually did happen, it would be because he failed at his damn job and was too busy purging actual citizens lawfully registered to vote and amidst this whole cadre of quote-unquote non-citizen voters who he thinks Stacey Abrams and Elizabeth Warren are trying to rally together. So what's he lying about? Elizabeth Warren and Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley and some amazing folks here locally had a big rally on a HBCU campus in Clayton County, which is just south of Atlanta, last week. Part of the conversation is talking about what Stacey has been building since she launched her campaign last year, which is a campaign that's for all Georgians and building a Georgia that's for all. I know that sounds a little kumbaya-ish, but it's really what she's doing when you look at who she's bringing together to vote in this election. But what they talked about was the blue wave, and how the blue wave, what that means is not literally, and they explain this. They talk about this. It's not just the people who are expected to vote. It is all of our communities. And the fact that undocumented families, non-citizens, are also a part of our communities. They are welcome here in Georgia. What Brian Kemp is really saying is that people who are black and brown are not welcome in his Georgia. That's all he's saying. By the way he aggressively pursues, purging African American, black, Latino, AAPI voters from the rolls over the last several years. It's not just happening right now that he's running for governor. He's been doing this. There's a clip that MSNBC, I think maybe might have even been Rachel Maddow, played in 2014, where he talks about how if these organizations, meaning the New Georgia Project and other organizations, were allowed to register minority voters, this is in 2014 when he was running for re-election, that they will be able to win, that Democrats can't be allowed. Basically, he's already been on record talking about his fear of voter registration and participation of black and brown people. So we already know this man has a vendetta, not just against Stacey Abrams, who created the New Georgia Project in 2013, 2014, but has made it her mission to expand voting opportunity. So he likes to lie, he likes to throw in jabs, and he has the Governors Association, all these other groups that work with him to do this stuff. Fox News apparently has been hamming it up as well. But it's really ridiculous in the saying what is happening here now. And to even say that the lawsuit that was filed, so to back up for everyone who might have saw the headlines over the last week, 53,000 Georgians have their voter registration on hold. They're pending. He is correct when he says that technically, per the law, voters can, with their proper ID, with their name that's substantially similar on their registration as on their ID, they can go to the polls and still vote if they were in queue to register and are just simply pending, right? That's if they've been kind of added to the system. Because there are some people saying that they registered and they're not even showing up. So that's a whole nother issue. But for him to say that this lawsuit pertaining to the 53,000 is actually an attempt to get non-citizens voting. This law, these 53,000 people, 70% are black Georgians. They're black Southerners. So we have the re-suppression of the black vote happening right now. And it's, like I said, it's been happening in at least the last 8 years since he's been in office. So he's lying on multiple fronts. He's been sued multiple times. This exact match issue right now that involves the 53,000 Georgians, he was sued actually back in 2016 by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Law, along with several other groups. And they reached a settlement. And I think it was about 42,000 people at that time. And they reached a settlement in February 2017 about this exact issue. He was sent a warning letter, I believe, in July of this summer, ahead of this election about this exact issue. To now have 53,000 people, after they previously sent him warning letters, and for him to sit here and lie, it shows that, one, he's just a liar and he's not trustworthy, and two, he's scared. Because they are in a dead heat right now. And really, we believe the polls are underestimating her the same way they did in the primary.
Okay, that's perfect. So I want to know, because I think that you can answer both of these questions in sort of one that I'll set up. So I'll be really clear about this. I didn't follow the Georgia primary particularly closely. I don't know, I don't know enough. I spoke publicly for Stacey Abrams because you and Benjamin Dixon, who I know and friends with and respect, both live in Georgia and supported her. So I thought, okay, if she passes muster with them, then I'm going to trust that she's a good candidate. So what is she, what's her campaign about? What's she running on? What's she talking about? And how does that overlap with your sense that maybe she's being underestimated in the polls?
Well, I'll take the second part, right, in terms
Okay.
of the polling.
Okay.
Because I just want to note we saw the same thing happen. Per the polling, Andrew Gillum was never supposed to be the nominee.
Right.
Per the polling, until that final weekend, Andrew Gillum was always in a distant third.
Right.
Right. There was like one random poll that had him second at that final weekend ahead of the election, and he won. But why I say the polling always had Stacey Abrams winning against her opponent in the primary, also named Stacey, both spelled the same way. Funny story, the Republican, the current lieutenant governor who was the Republican favorite, Casey Cagle, his middle name is actually Stacey, also spelled the same way. So we would have had another Stacey versus Stacey race. But so the polling always had her winning, but the margin she ultimately won by was like unprecedented. Like no one from the polling would have expected her to have a blowout the way she did. She beat her opponent by like almost 50 points, and all the polling had it very close.
She beat her by 50 points?
Yeah, it was like 73 to 27.
Oh wow, I knew it was big. I didn't know it was that big.
It was something. I forgive me guys because it's been a while since I looked at those numbers, but it was a huge gap, and we saw. But what we saw and what we're not seeing, it's the same thing we were saying in 2016 about the polls, right? How the polls just can't account for voting behavior and how campaigns are really building with field and engaging. They rely on old models and old ways of thinking about how to do electoral work. Now, post-2016, we're seeing a lot of candidates that are really investing in not just issue-based campaigns that are strong, and we saw this obviously when we saw Bernie Sanders run in 2015, 2016, his presidential run, standing strong on certain issues, as well as the grassroots movement that built around him. So we're seeing a lot of candidates who have built their own followings up just using that similar type of model, so to speak, right? So what we're seeing happening here, though, is we're seeing that polling isn't still not considering what they call low propensity voters, people who have not voted like in midterm elections, people who have sat out or non-voters. They're not counting new voters. They're not counting younger voters. Like these polls are riddled. Like there's a recent CNN poll that everyone's been going either gaga or angry about, with showing that Joe Biden is leading the pack if he were to run for president. But that CNN poll, I think when we broke it down, it only looked at people over 45 and white. The polling that we're seeing that's being pushed at us by mainstream media isn't really grappling with the reality that activists and organizers, the grassroots, is seeing actually on the ground in these campaigns. So what Stacey is running on are things like Medicaid expansion. Now, I know a lot of folks are like, but we need Medicare for all. I absolutely agree. But living here in the South, having immediate members of my family who, but for, Medicaid expansion, will not be able to get Medicaid care, I'm okay with that being like a step in the right direction, because I believe that a lot of organizations like Our Revolution, like Center for Popular Democracy, like Democracy for America, have gotten in so early with Stacey and have been able to really help her, have the support she needs to move left the way she needs to trend progressively and strong. Yep. I mean, she's looking at, expanding opportunity in terms of pre-K education, really investing in universal pre-K.
That's a big issue.
That is a big issue. I mean, she moved left enough on enough issues, but and it's not just that she was doing this because she wanted to get the vote. We've had this conversation offline before, Michael, about how Black candidates, sometimes candidates of color, do not have the same access or support to be as progressive they want to be if they're dependent upon only these party systems and structures to support them when they're running. So with her, because she has built the support that she's built over the years, but also because organizations like Center for Popular Democracy, because I don't know if people listen when she talks. I listened to a talk she gave to like a construction union. I can't remember what it was, but like I listen to her when she talks, and she'll say things like freedom to thrive. That's actually not only a hashtag, but it's also a theme that runs through this really brilliant report that Center for Popular Democracy did about how we can re-envision the way we spend money and resources in our local communities in terms of defunding police and investing in communities so that people have the freedom to thrive. So it's not that she's just repeating these terms and phrases, but it's really been imbued. And you can see it in the organizers who are working on her campaign and who have really been helping her flesh through some of these issues. She was the first gubernatorial candidate recently, this past week, and she's the first gubernatorial candidate to ever speak address Pride here in Atlanta. So she addressed Pride and she was the first person to ever do that. I mean, it's just a lot that's going on with her campaign that made sense to me in terms of education, public education opportunity, and what's at stake here in Georgia. Medicaid for all, Medicaid expansion is actually a very popular thing across both parties.
Yeah, of course.
Republicans, we've had so many rural hospital closures here, which really decimate not just health opportunity, but also entire, economies. And then you also have the burden of uncompensated care costs at the county and at the state level. That's really been a huge issue when you look at that as well. So that's like one topic that she's been talking about that I think, again, for those who are organizing, like I appreciate my local DSA folks. And again, I'm not our DSA spokesperson here in Atlanta, but what I appreciate the way folks have been organizing is the fact that we want this other thing, but this immediate, thing that our legislature here stateside already has the support, in terms of people to do, gets us closer. And then we can build on that to help educate people for why we need to get to Medicare for all.
Well, and also expand their sense of what's possible. I mean,
absolutely.
That is the fundamental argument that always comes again with these. I mean, look, accelerationism is bullshit, and I'm not playing with other people's lives. And certainly I could speak personally to, as I've said, things like knowing the difference between home heating assistance being cut or funded, really basic stuff. But also the other thing that they don't, I mean, even Obamacare, which of course the best part of Obamacare was the Medicaid expansion, but even just the idea that there was some regulations put into place for HMOs to not be able to entirely abuse people. They still abuse people a lot because private insurance is, in my view, just fundamentally an abusive parasitic proposition. But being that as it may, that enhanced people's expectations. Even that neoliberal centrist, like that's actually all true as describing that bill, that still enhanced people's conception. If you put people getting Medicaid on the table in the Republican governored, far right, anti-poor, anti-healthcare, anti-rural people, anti-people of color South, and people get that care, they're not going to sit and go, all right, well, that's cool. They might start saying, well, wait a second, what about that whole Medicare for all thing? That's how it works.
Well, I think one of the things like I said, from being in DSA and getting to know like some of the comrades across various different chapters, right? Like I throw jabs a lot on Twitter, especially at folks from the larger chapters, not because I don't think people are good people or aren't doing good work, but like there's a lot happening in the South, and I've learned a lot more being here in Atlanta, getting more involved around Stacey's campaign and starting to get to know, because when like the real organizers are like, yeah, this is how we're rolling, and not that, and you listen to the conversation, right? Because you'll see quote unquote real, like the real hardcore organizers, the folks that really be that crew out there all the time pounding the pavement. Like you'll see those people maybe get behind a candidate and they're like, oh, this is the best we can do because someone else is so horrible. But like the idea was that Stacey actually is a good candidate, and there's an opportunity to actually push. Like she wants to expand, like the work that's been done locally with Song Southerners on New Ground and other organizations around ending cash bail reform here in the city of Atlanta. That is something that there's some remnants of criminal justice reform that were put in place, surprisingly, by our current Republican governor, who has chosen to support, obviously, the Republican nominee, who actually wants to undo his work. But Stacey, is looking to these organizers and stuff to expand upon this stuff at the state level. So when I love how people are actually, because I talk about this all the time, we need to build accountability into our support into the process, right? Yes. Nsé Ufot, who is the executive director of the New Georgia Project, as I mentioned, that's the organization that's been doing massive voter registration over the past few years, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but the numbers are like mind-blowing what their organization has done. They actually released a new app, a civic tech app, that if you put in, you put in your address and stuff, and it brings up all the different, it brings up your whole ballot for you right there on your phone. It goes through the different amendments and ballot issues. And so, they do a lot of work. They also have worked connected with local celebrities and rappers, and they do like a Souls to the Pole type of thing, but then they do it from like the HBCU campuses. So they have rappers and reverends and HBCU students, and so there's all this great work that is happening. And so one thing Insei and I talked about though was like, Stacey's our girl. We're here for this Black Girl Magic, but you best believe we holding her accountable.
Right.
Like, yeah, brunch, we love you, blah blah blah, but you still gonna come correct and do what needs to be done. So this is being built in the process, and no, there's no perfect candidate, right? There's no perfect candidate anywhere in the world. We're gonna be upset with folks,
except for Lula. But that's my dude. I'm just playing. Go ahead.
But seriously though,
Yes.
this is what we have happening right now in Georgia. So what I'm seeing now in Georgia, I'm seeing like even the ladies who kind of drove me, the folks who kind of drove me nuts in 2016, like post 2016, the special election for John Ossoff's race, like a lot of people are coming together and really like building community. Just yesterday, Black Voters Matter is an organization that has been like touring the South. They have this amazing, it's really dope, this amazing tour bus. I actually got to do a 2-day bus tour with their group through South Georgia, but they have this amazing bus, Black Voters Matter, and they've been going around doing voter outreach, doing GOTV stuff, like basically just helping where they can and helping to spread the love, because a lot of the rural areas, people think of rural and think it's just white Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who are white in rural areas who didn't vote, who didn't support Trump either, right? But there's Black people in those areas, there's brown people, there's other people in those areas too. So they've been going through the South to like make the case. And also the South is a lot more progressive than it gets credit for. It's just that a lot of times people are cut off from opportunity, from resources, and they don't feel connected to anything. Like one of the things I'm finding through my current work, working with, municipal candidates, is I have folks running for county commissioners in these like traditionally red communities. They are seeing some of the same issues of affordable housing, healthcare, homelessness that we're hearing about in our Oaklands, in our Atlantas, in our Chicagos, etc. And so they're getting excited when they're finally getting connected to people, because especially when you're living in a rural area, your nearest neighbor is however many miles away, you may not know that anybody else like you exists. So it's great when initiatives like this happen. But what happened though with Black Voters Matter yesterday though, Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright are the founders. They were taking a group of Black seniors to vote. Early voting started here yesterday in Georgia. They were really excited. They had a local senior herself who organized the event. And I don't know if she's a senior. My bad, sis, because you have gray hair, so I shouldn't assume. But someone who was local to the community, right, who was known by the seniors at this community center. They knew her. They trusted her. They all agreed. So they were excited. Latasha and Cliff and their crew were really excited to be able to do this service. I mean, to take 40, predominantly Black women to go vote, that's like life-giving. I mean, Right. I was on the bus with them back when the Randolph County situation was happening, when they were trying to close those polls, and we got to go through the southern Georgia and stuff. So that was life-giving for me then. So I can only imagine what it is right now with all this energy. Well, somebody from the county got nervous or whatever, and they ordered them off the bus. They filed a complaint, and the Senior Citizen Center was just like, well, someone complained and they're worried, so everybody has to get off the bus and we can't do this today. So they stopped them from taking over 40 Black seniors to go vote yesterday. These people are still going to go vote, and they were even more fired up.
That's so
and they're going to tell,
yeah.
but this is what's happening. It's not just here, it's across the board, and it's sick.
Yeah, definitely want you to elaborate on that in 30 seconds, or not. I'll ask about it in 30 seconds, but I just wanted to note, I liked what you alluded to before about sort of like even like kind of some of the Ossoff people. And one thing I think, especially in contrast to like all of the, social media spiciness and everything that people gets into, is that, and also the fact that it's okay that people have genuine ideological disagreements in a coalition. That's actually very healthy and good for an ecosystem. But some things are resolved by people actually doing things together, right? Like we look at things differently, but we're working to elect Stacey Abrams. We look at things differently, but we're working, on a particular ecological or justice or, global initiative. Like not just, reviewing each other's hot takes, which, of course I do and everybody does, and it's fun and it's great, whatever. But I think some of that stuff is literally addressed by doing things together.
Agreed. Like, and when we actually move people past these like hyper silos on social media, we find the commonality and we're able to build. That doesn't mean we ignored like bad or idiotic things people are doing. But so we're seeing it, and we're seeing support not just for Stacey Abrams, but for also candidates down the ballot. You know, we got Shelley Hutchinson running in, I can't remember the House district or whatever. We got amazing candidates. We got Aisha Yakub running. We have El Mahdi Holly running down in House District 111, Regina Lewis Ward in 109. Those were actually two of the candidates present with the infamous now infamous Eric Holder comments. Like, there's a lot happening, and we have Michael. I know we got to go, but like, let me.
No, we have a few more minutes.
Fact.
Go.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, go.
So with this fact, though, there were 6 counties that went red to blue in 2016. I know everyone always focuses on all the counties that went blue to red. Oh my God! But there were 6 counties that flipped red to blue, right, in 2016. 3 of them are here in Georgia: Henry County, where Regina Lewis Ward and El Mahdi Holly are, and Gwinnett County and Cobb County. Gwinnett County, all of those are right.
And
right
these
on
are
the
state rep races we're talking about?
These are state rep races.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So there are these. We're seeing one in the Georgia primary. We saw explosive turnout. Yes, there were more Republicans than Democrats in voting in the primary, but what we saw was a huge increase in Democratic participation in the primary and a real narrowing of the gap between Republican and Democratic turnout. When we look at the general in the past 2 cycles, like it's been such a small just percentage difference between in the final vote. So when we're just extrapolating out and looking at the participation in the election, as well as these candidates who are running now in these districts, like the people I've been mentioning, like we have folks who are also endorsed. Shelley Hutchinson is in House District 107, which is in Gwinnett County, which is one of the counties that flipped and went from red to blue. It's also one of the most diverse or rapidly diversifying counties in the country or something like that. Like, there are these places in the state that are now minority majority districts, but they have not had anyone of color actually running in them. Now, I'm with a lot of folks, you know what I'm saying? I know folks that they back up by identity politics. For me, representation always matters, and y'all can come hit me up on Twitter if you funky, and we can talk about more about that. But it's important that we have people who are actually reflecting and representing the communities they come from, as in the mindset, which these candidates are, as well as in actual lived experiences, et cetera, right? So having a Black woman social worker mom like Shelley, who is representing her district, which it looks more like her than the incumbent, is important. Having a district down in Henry County with Regina Lewis Ward, who's originally actually from Brooklyn, big ups to Brooklyn, and right. El Mahdi Holly, like having those 2 people, running in a district which actually has been redistricted 3 times in the past 5 years, having them overcome the incumbents they're running against and actually reflecting and representing the district where they are is important and valuable. And yes, I'm plugging these people because they're also right on the issues. If y'all know me, I don't just roll people because they Black.
Right. Well, I mean, that's to me like, yeah. I mean, I think
there's folks I won't even mess with. So
no, I mean, to me, like, I mean, I think everything is there's always a dialectical relationship, and I think that like a lot of that initial critique was people like the Clinton campaign saying, everything is subordinate to an identity, and that's trash. That's wrong. That is a totally different thing than saying, of course. And by the way, like literally across the board, I don't have a problem, not if it's positioned in a racist way, obviously, but I don't have a problem if somebody's like, hey, I grew up in some rural district somewhere, and maybe I want somebody who has farming experience, right? Like, we could really expand the bounds of people wanting to have some sense that who represents them share an experience with them is not a radical notion, and it shouldn't be to anybody. Like, it's actually pretty obvious. Actually, real quick before I ask you the final question, you have a candidate, I believe, in Boston that you wanted to talk about. Can you do that?
Yes, and okay. I do. I need everyone to go check out Rachel Rollins for Suffolk County DA. Rachel Rollins is running for Suffolk County DA. DA races also have a county. I'm about to slip this one in. Mark Hayes is running in Hennepin County, Minnesota. Got DA candidates running across the country. We've already seen with Kim Fox and Larry in Philly. Like we've seen the way DA
matters.
It
matters a lot. Who's in the DA position?
Rachel Rollins is similar to the DAs we saw before her, like Krasner and others, is really trying to, addressing issues with cash bail, ending cash bail, addressing, she's declining to prosecute actually certain lower level offenses and have them handled with community service or other things. And she's getting a lot of flack. So I need folks to check her out. I will definitely be tweeting about her and stuff like that. But I need folks to check out Rachel Rollins, give her a boost, give her support. Go, if you're in the area, go volunteer with her campaign, help them out, because she's running, even though Boston is a Democratic city or whatever, she's running against an independent who's backed by the police, who has prior DV charges from his ex with his wife or ex-wife, I can't remember. But the police are trying to handpick once again their DA. Similar things happening in Hennepin County, Minnesota, which is the largest county in Minnesota. It's where Minneapolis is. Mark Hayes is running against a 20-plus year incumbent who actually prosecuted a young black trans woman several years ago for defending herself. He prosecuted her for attempted murder for defending herself when she was actually being physically attacked and violated outside of a jail. It was actually Coco. It's actually not Coco. Apologies, sis. Cece. It's actually Cece McDonald. It's actually a famous case. So he's also been a part of the war on drugs. And just he actually tried to testify in the early 2000s against the disproportionality between crack and cocaine sentencing. So he needs to go. Mike
that was what Republicans got on that one.
But he's a Democrat. Though.
And he's a Democrat, right?
So this is in Hennepin County. This is an instance where any blue won't do.
Absolutely.
So these are two DAs. I need y'all on this. I'm going to give Michael some more information to tweet out and stuff, but I need y'all to look at these two DA races. And, I got some more local elections and stuff I was tweeting about earlier to y'all. If y'all want to know what's going on with municipal elections, definitely hit me up, because that's where that's what gives me hope right now with all this craziness is the local level stuff.
In the future, okay, so I think it's fair to say, and I'm definitely supportive of Stacey Abrams. I'm supportive of Andrew Gillum. And I would say, and I always draw the distinction, right? There's my favorite candidates: Bernie Sanders, AOC, Connie Ng, Barbara Lee. Then there's people that I like and I need to know more about, but I'm actually if I could vote for them, it would be an affirmative vote. And that's Andrew Gillum, Stacey Abrams, and some other candidates whose names are escaping me right now. And then there's other candidates I would also vote for Bill Nelson in Florida because I'm a harm minimized voter. Sorry, right? That's how it is. But when you look at candidates like Gillums and Abrams, who are genuine center-left candidates, definitely Abrams, moving very strongly in the right direction. She has people like you in her circles, which to me is a bigger metric for measuring where they're going than they are in some ways, because that's the context for campaigns is a bigger deal, the structure around them. And you look at the broader changing, just demographics and ideological leanings of people who would vote Democratic across the board in the South, combined with the fact that obviously this is the war on voting rights and civil rights is intensifying, although it has been going on for quite some time, as you say. Do you see a future where the Southern Democratic Party, and maybe also, I know you're one of the things I love about you is how historically oriented you are. So there's also the hidden Southern left history, which, also exists as well. Do you see a scenario where the Southern Democratic Party goes from Bill Clinton pulling everybody to the third way and to Tyson Chicken versus, Stacey Abrams and others actually pulling the Democratic Party towards genuine commitments on healthcare, on ending cash bail, on, the environment, justice, and so on?
I think we're at the very beginning of the possibility of that happening. While I personally am not a Democrat identifying, I do, caucus with them from time to time. But from Ching, I'm a Georgia Bernie, right?
Yep. That was very Bernie of you.
but I caucus with them frequently because they're often right on the issues that I need to see, and quite a few. I mean, I have a lot of hope when I look at some of the folks who are running for county chair right now. I have some friends who are strong progressives who are looking in the right direction, who get this, who are nurturing and getting out there and organizing and emphasizing field. So it's possibly eventually the party could go in that direction. It just depends upon if we as progressives are actually building our pipeline. I think Abrams is doing that through her campaign, the way she's nurturing and providing opportunity. I think despite some of the issues I've noticed with Gilliam's campaign and some of the interference, I will say, from the Florida Democratic Party, he has done that as well. I've met probably one of the youngest people I've ever met involved in data, who worked with his campaign, who's only about 22, 23 years old, and she was his data director.
Cool.
So, I mean, so I see that there are those, it just depends upon whether or not we as a bloc stay, one, engaged and organized, and that we, two, work on expanding our ranks and building the pipeline to come behind us. So I don't think with Abrams win it's going to be an overnight, thing, but I do think it definitely makes the case for the strategy that she's been employing. We're talking about expanding the electorate and really investing in what it looks like to have a coalition of progressive, leaning white people and people of color voters. Because when we're looking at the South, when you're looking at Georgia in particular, Georgia has not had more than 30% of the white vote going Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992. It's been steadily around between 22 and 25% of the vote since the late 90s. And Abrams is polling at about 27, 28%. So she's doing slightly better. But that's also because in the last several years, we've had an influx of progressive white people into the South. Right. We've had an influx of more and more people of color into these states as well. I mean, Georgia's on its way to being a majority-minority state in the next, I think, 10 years or so, because of the huge population shifts that we're seeing across the state. So, I mean, can it happen in the South? There's some amazing work being done. Project South has been doing work across the entire South as well as Puerto Rico. I mean, we're seeing, what we've been seeing with Chokwe Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi. So it's possible, but it's going to take time. Just the same thing, I think it's possible we can shift the nation, but it's going to take time. And we have to build a pipeline, and we have to stay organized.
Anoa Changa, everybody should follow her. Find all of the links to all of the ways you can.
Well, I'm on Spotify now, too, guys.
You're on Spotify? Now I'm pissed. We're not on Spotify. What the fuck?
I'll tell you. Now it's I get on Spotify and then 3 days later they announce that everybody with a podcast can get on Spotify. So I was special for 3 days. So. But there's a lot of amazing work happening down here. Shout out to Eric Robinson and Insei Ufat with New Georgia Project Action Fund. Like I said, candidates that I'm most excited about. These are not the only ones, but these are some of the ones top of my head. Shelly Hutchinson, Aisha Yaqub is an amazing young Muslim sister who's running for state house. Renita Shannon is dope and she's an elected official herself, but has been organizing and canvassing for all these other amazing progressives all cycles. So, El Mahdi Holly and Regina Lewis Ward, tons of great people as well. So don't just look at what's on the top of the ticket. If you're really annoyed with whoever's on top of your ticket where you are, looking to see what's happening with local races. If you don't have a local race right now, you're going to have a local race in the next cycle or two, because there's literally a local election happening all the time. And you guys will possibly be having a special election for a public advocate. Yes. I might have to come into New York soon. Who knows?
Oh, yeah. Well, Nomiki Konst. That's going to happen. And when you come to New York, you have to come do the show in studio. Anoa, thank you a million as always. Anoa Changa. Anoa.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anoa. That was a revelation. Anoa with a clean phone connection.
It's pretty amazing.
That was amazing.
She went from one of the the average. She shot up to the highest quality phone. That was
that was amazing. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Anna Navarro is one of the dumbest people in American politics. She's the opposite of everything Anoa was just talking about. I believe her father was connected with the Contras. I should have double-checked that before the show. Maybe somebody can double-check that for me. But she actually, to her credit.
Yeah, her dad was a Contra.
Her dad was literally a Contra. Her dad was in the CIA drug traffic, kill nuns guerrilla army. Now, I don't know what he did. I do know what the Contras did. Maybe he was just in Miami. And again, one does not need to idolize or not recognize the flaws of, say, Daniel Ortega to know that, like, in the 1980s, if you weren't supporting the Sandinistas over the Contras, you're a fundamentally untrustworthy person.
That's why she became a Republican.
That is why she became a Republican, because Ronald Reagan were supporting death squad groups across Latin America. And she built a business where she was a Republican consultant. There was more opportunity in the George Bush era for sort of pretending to not be racist and, promoting vouchers and things like that. Yes.
I'm just on a profile of her in Tampa Bay at tampabay.com. In the 1980s, the first-year law student at University of Miami campaigned for aid to the Contras in her native Nicaragua. The daughter of a well-off family in the agriculture business, her father was an early opponent of Anastasio Somoza, who went on to fight against leftist revolutionaries. She moved to Miami at age 8 to escape the violence. I became a Republican before I knew what a Republican even was because of Ronald Reagan, she said. And now that
And there's a theme there, because now she's rebranded herself as the resistance on CNN, and all she does is tweet like, Ronald Reagan would never do this. John McCain, I don't know what he would do, but it would be classy, and I wish we could have it right now. And that is half a ridiculous, problematic impression. It's also half totally accurate. So lay off.
And when we do things like that might get us in trouble, we always pick our targets well.
We pick our targets
quite
well.
In which case we can say, I'm glad we're talking about Navarro being a daughter of a Contra.
Yeah, right. Which reminds me of, like, John McCain support the Contras. Okay? When he supported death squads that rape and kill nuns, he did it with a certain class, which Donald Trump does not have. So, this is Ana Navarro, speaking of problematic. She is a solution to the whole Elizabeth Warren debacle. Now, Elizabeth Warren, this whole DNA test thing, I mean, look, here's my read. I'm not going to spend much time talking about this. Elizabeth Warren, in many ways, is a very good candidate. She is not as good a candidate as Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is the absolute number one pick, in my view, of anybody with left politics, in my opinion. But Elizabeth Warren is a good candidate. If they both ran, I hope they wouldn't both run, because I don't want them to cancel each other out. But it would be a very novel experience to have two candidates that one actually likes and respects in a presidential primary. But she's not a socialist. She definitely has a foreign policy which is not impressive so far. And she has not broken orthodoxies and moving in this more integral direction that Bernie Sanders has done. And the foreign policy is not a side piece. That's an integral part of any long-term left strategy. I think that unless you go for the jugular, you're not going to win those bullshit, tabloid, racist, bully, misogynist games with Donald Trump. He's a piece of garbage. He knows exactly how to play to his cult, and he's really good at that. And, it seems like there's a family story of a part of her heritage being Native American. She used it in a way that was advantageous. To be clear, let's not buy into conservative mythology here. One does not get to be a faculty at Harvard because of that. It might have helped her in a way, and it might have been inappropriate for her to do that. Although I'm frankly not in a position where I'm going to judge that. It's just not my place to judge. But she's an incredibly accomplished person. She's been hugely beneficial in American debate on bankruptcy, on Wall Street. She helped the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, which is one of the prime benefits of the Obama era, is her. And she's proposed some very good things in the Senate. And this play is sort of blowing up in her face. But anyways, and this is the type of I wish this woman would become a political consultant again because I want Republicans to pay for this kind of advice. Elizabeth Warren should poke fun at all of this and actually dress like Pocahontas for Halloween. I'm doing a terrible accent here. I can't even do it. Elizabeth Warren releases the results of DNA tests on Native American ancestry to the Boston Globe. So Anna Navarro's brain breakthrough is Elizabeth Warren should dress up as Pocahontas for Halloween. And I'm going to echo friend of the show, Brendan from The Discourse, which is another great show that everybody should subscribe to on Patreon or iTunes or both. I just was on actually this past Sunday. He does a great show. He tweeted out, and we don't have it, but he tweeted out, I'll paraphrase, "This is an absolutely horrible idea, and I really hope it happens." So let me co-sign with Brendan on that one. And this is Anna Navarro. She's one of the most important voices in mainstream cable news, and a real trooper against galloping American fascism, even as she literally got her start by having solidarity with death squads in her native country. So, great. All right, we got to get to our segments. And we've got some, I believe, a regulate. We could switch it up. You want to switch up the order? You want to start with it?
Yeah, mine's a bit shorter, so we want to.
All right, let's start with the GEM system. Do you like this GEM for Griscom Economic Minute?
It sounds a little luxurious.
Well, I was also thinking like this is my guide to socialism, the GEM system. Want to succeed in real estate, but also impress people at a party?
That's how we have to package socialism,
Yeah.
like one of those infomercials.
Yeah. Hi.
5 steps to the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Right.
G, get all the money. E, eradicate the enemies.
It's in 5 steps. G's for get out all the money. E's for eradicate. Now, this is going to sound a little extreme, but we're going to break it down, guys. By the time we break it down, it's going to be really simple. There was a group called the Cossacks. Sorry.
This show just degenerates into like really weird historical rants about Russian characters. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a solid background.
That would be Marco Rubio if he was a communist. He'd be like, "Hey, I'm Marco Rubio. I want to introduce you to a thing called democratic socialism. It's an awesome system for not only improving your life, but also your friends and neighbors. Hi, I'm Marco Rubio."
I just want to update people as to the theme song. This was sent in by SoulBrother215 Infinite Content on Twitter. This is the Philly News and Philly theme, WPVI TV. So
This is not bad.
It's going for the mayhem vibe. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk. It actually fits with this section because this was a
All right,
huge
go ahead,
disaster
you little motherfucker.
This was a huge disaster last week. So if you didn't notice, the stock market had a huge sell-off last week.
Yes.
In just 2 days, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped more than 1,300 points.
Whoa, I'm sorry. I feel really rude here. How's everybody's portfolios looking? I'm sorry I didn't ask this earlier.
You know, I've been investing pretty widely, so I wasn't hit as hard. But
You diversified your
I've
bonds?
been diversifying my portfolio.
You diversified
well,
your
if you
bonds?
buy bonds, it's actually a good move.
I can't finish that thought. That's from a great Chappelle Show sketch.
Yeah, so, you know, there's a pretty massive sell-off last week. And just to put it in some numbers that we can understand and also to laugh at a little bit, there were some very big losers last week. Some of our favorite people, Jeff Bezos took one of the largest hits. $12 billion in value evaporated over 2 days.
Boo-boo.
Alphabet CEO Larry Page lost $2.3 billion in value. And Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg also saw his shares drop $1.7 billion. So, of course, this led to a lot of debate about what the what the reasons behind this massive sell-off were. And, you know, I'll just go over them real quick. Is like sort of what we've been talking about. One is the Federal Reserve is going to be, you know, is rising interest rates. And that has, you know, sort of ended the cheap money era that has sort of blown up, you know, sort of propped up the stock market through, you know, things like corporate buybacks and things like that. It made money cheap. So there's a lot of money to go around. Now, of course, that money never trickled its way down into investing into corporations or investing into the working people or wage increases. It really just went to inflate stocks. So that's a big blow for them. And the other thing is a trade war with China, which looks to be getting worse. Now, so where are we? Morgan Stanley's chief U.S. equity strategist, Mike Wilson, said that this is likely to be a continuing trend in the coming months. But over the past couple of days, we've actually seen, as typically happens, a market rebound. So, I've been getting a lot of people asking me about this, and I just really want to make this very clear to people.
Now, is the camera on you so people can see the Bernie hand motions that he's making? Well, that's Bill Clinton there. It's like the Wall Street is not the real economy. You want to do communist Bill?
I can't do the good Bill Clinton accent.
All right. Well, keep going, and I'll translate it.
The stock market is not the economy. What the stock market is a way for rich people to pay themselves off of the value that they've already extracted from the people who create value in this country, which are the working class. Now, it's really important that we understand this because people oftentimes like to take cheap political hits at their opponents. Analysts love to do this, is to point to the stock market. Trump does this all the time. Whenever the stock market is up, oh, look how great I am on the economy. Democrats do this too on the opposite. Oh, look how bad Trump is on the economy. This misses the point. The point is very simple. It's been the point of the past 40 years of the U.S. economy, which is that as we've shifted our perspective of what a good economy looks like by looking at the stock market, by tying CEOs' compensation to the stock market, by creating laws that encourage corporations and have CEOs have duties to make sure that shareholder value is increased all the time, that we've created this bizarre economy where the number one most important thing is to increase shareholder value for stockholders. This is a small portion of the population, and it doesn't do stuff that creates a strong real economy for workers. It certainly hasn't helped out with wages for working people in the United States. And this is what happens when you have a contradiction between fictitious capital, which is what stocks basically are, right, and the real economy. And these are opposite sides of the spectrum, because the more money that you extract for increasing stock value, so when you do things like sell everything that is in Toys R Us and fire all the employees and pull off a massive profit for yourself, that's in contradiction with creating an economy that's putting people to work and is creating some value or meaning or creating some service in people's lives. Instead, there's this focus on creating shareholder value, which is something that can be so abstract from any kind of real or material reality for people that it's completely nonsensical, and has created this very tiered system that we have in the U.S. economy, where some people are so fixated on the movement of fictitious capital, which can evaporate in a day and can grow back the next day, because it does not necessarily represent the actual on-the-ground material reality of production in the U.S. economy. It's just as a guess on future profits, and then it is a legal title to extract future profits. And we need to be really clear about that and to stop focusing on it so much, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to get out of this hellhole cycle that we've been living in for the past 30 years, where we just try to inflate the stock market to make everyone think that the economy is doing good when people really are struggling to get by on their basic needs.
I got a question for y'all. When LeBron scores a point, do you think you scored? That's right, you're not on the floor. You're not in that game. Same thing with Wall Street, except when Wall Street scores a point, it's at your expense. And when LeBron scores a point, you cheer. So you need to get out of this false consciousness of thinking of yourself as an investor and understand that you're part of an exploited class. It's the only way we're going to move forward.
Michael, that hurts me, because when the Texas Longhorns scored a touchdown, I scored a touchdown. Right?
See, that's the type of delusion that's at work. That's the fairy tale that capitalists have been telling people since time immemorial to divide them from their actual interests. Good stuff, as always. David Griscom, the GEM system. Winning in life and politics with socialism. And now we have, I believe the GEM system comes from Thames Darwin, prominent, not only a Smarty Pants patron, but actually the guest on the illicit history of German socialism and German social democracy, which Alexa understands better than Steven Crowder.
I was going to try to find a Nixon tape to go with that, because there's a famous Nixon tape. It's actually, people can look it up. I just couldn't find the sound the time, but it's like, I think, May 4th, 1972, Nixon's talking about the stock market, and he says, the American people, the middle, the gray American, they're suckers, and they're talking about the stock market going up and how they can be manipulated by that stuff. That's not really how it goes. I feel like it's veering into like Price is Right territory.
Yeah.
But anyway,
changing a little bit. Maybe we should experiment, seeing if chopping up the speed could do something with it.
Probably could. Have you seen A Bad Situationist, Michael?
No. I watch Sam's work with the same attentiveness that he watches mine.
So I actually have watched that one.
I didn't actually. That's like the obvious cheap joke, but I have to figure out here.
That's the one where Benjamin and Marin plays the radical.
No, I haven't watched.
Okay,
that
yeah.
one.
It's
I watched pilot season.
It's funny, but Bad Situationist. A situationist is these French philosophers, and I'm not terribly caught up on it, to be honest, but I do know one concept from it, which is called psychogeography. And I have it up here. Psychogeography
Is that up on screen right now?
Is an exploration of urban environments that emphasizes playfulness and drifting. It has links to the situationist and blah, blah, blah. So it's an interesting concept. I first heard of it because of Will Self, who famously wrote for The Guardian some columns where he would walk from his place in London to Heathrow just by foot, and then fly to LAX, and then walk from LAX to his hotel in LA, and you get a very interesting view of the city on foot. And I'm a big walker. I walk to work every day. I've walked from like basically Red Hook to Greenpoint to Flatbush, so I've seen a lot of Brooklyn. And and one observation I've made is that if you were to place me down anywhere in Brooklyn and I didn't open my eyes and I just smelt piss, I would know that I would be next to a giant luxury high-rise that had just been completed, because they don't plan for this at all. It's clear that they make these things too tall and they don't have room for people's pets. So there's always one side of the building where people come and let their animals. And literally, there's nearby our building, the sidewalk is made for drainage, so it's a big wide sidewalk. But if you look very closely, there's a path that goes through. So if water goes on it, it'll snake through these. And that's always just dog piss, basically.
Right.
And it's frankly disgusting.
It's disgusting. People have to realize, if you don't know Brooklyn, I mean, it's across New York, but particularly Brooklyn, because there's actually a lot of neighborhoods that are more not only residential, but even when they were built up, it wasn't built up with high rises. And they stick these new buildings in, which are quote unquote luxury buildings, and they literally are just like, they're sore thumbs, just sticking out like total monstrosities in the landscape. They don't fit anything. They look like something that like Tony Montana would like try to build in Scarface or something. Like they're just trash, and but they're quote unquote luxury.
Yeah, and I'm very against them because I'm from North Dakota. Okay. There is one skyscraper in North Dakota that's the North Dakota capital, 18 stories, so not huge.
Not huge.
I think it would pretty much blend in Manhattan.
I think it would probably blend in.
And because of that, I used to have a fascination with skyscrapers. And now, basically, it's beginning about 5 or 10 years ago, once you realize the conditions that say the big skyscrapers in the Middle East and Dubai, for instance.
The ones in the Emirates.
You realize that it's not quite the amazing, like, look at human achievement. It's like, oh, look at the slave labor that was used.
Money and slave labor will get you anything you want.
Yeah, and I would just say, I just thought, this isn't maybe the most deep, but I think, look, disgust, as Jonathan Haidt, who none of us like, says, disgust is a big part of people's politics, and that's what just disgusted me on the walk into work today.
You also said there's a class distinction here.
Oh yeah, well totally. People just because we've been watching a lot of Steven Crowder and dealing with Proud Boys, the type of things that sort of like as often racialized remarks of the way these people view the city, right?
Right.
Like, and how they're never really in a city; they're in the suburbs all the time.
Yeah, they don't know anything about it.
And like the sort of flippant comments, and really like I think that we should maybe more focus on the developers that are making this be our surroundings.
You're angry about piss on the street. Don't be a racist asshole. Be an advocate of universal public housing and breaking up the real estate trusts.
And maybe have a place in Manhattan where you can go to the bathroom without spending $5 for a latte.
Indeed. I mean, that's something like, if you go, I mean, that really is a distinction with Europe, right? Like, not to put Europe on a pedestal. And I haven't spent even that much time in Europe. But, like, one thing that will just hit you is like, oh, this is just like a really nice park. And there's a bathroom that people can use. And you're trained, like, who do I have to give money to? Or, like, what person lives around here that's giving me the key code to get in here? And it's like, no, this is public space for the public. I mean, these are like basic hallmarks of any remotely decent, humane society. And that is, in fact, psychic geography. It has a huge effect on people's well-being psychologically to have those respites.
But I can just imagine somebody walking through and they could walk past something where like 20 dogs have peed on the sidewalk,
right?
And not see anything besides like, look at that amazing real estate,
right?
And then they walk past a homeless guy and be like, isn't that just gross? Why can't he get a job or something like that, right?
Right, exactly, right, no doubt. Meanwhile, the real estate's the one that's driving down their property values. So they're not. See, the thing is, they don't look at it structurally.
And I'd also say, just to throw another little shot, is I think the people that buy that kind of real estate don't really care where their dog pisses.
No.
I think like they're going to go down that street, let the dog piss, and go back.
Unless they're a patron of this show, in which case I'm sure that they had a great reason for moving wherever they moved.
Yes. No, of course not. A literary hangover.
Or a literary hangover as well, indeed.
Those buildings freak me out. I was walking. There's one that's being, it's just grown up in the past 3 months near my apartment, and they all look so similar. And the worst thing is when they try to make the lobby very friendly. So there was one today, and they all are done by the same graphic design company. It looks like, and it just said, "Welcome home." In like big letters, and it was
those are truly like not Orwellian. They're very Brave New World.
Brave New World.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
it's like be happy, relax.
Well, there's other. Speaking of psychogeography, you walk around New York when it's freezing cold out, and again, people are sleeping on the streets, and then you walk by and you see how every bit of real estate has just a massive, empty, well-lit lobby full of couches that aren't being used. Like it is perverse. It's really disgusting.
It is literally perverse. Yes, and it should be disgusting. And this is another problem. Not to get into it with hate, is make distinctions about what you're disgusted about. Like if you're disgusted about like a food smell you're not used to, that's on you to grow the fuck up. If you're disgusted because somebody is laying on the street in 10-degree weather and there's a heated couch in a lobby, that's because you have basic moral imagination. And that's a good thing, and that is a superior thing. And that's what we're going to need to cultivate if we're going to survive as a species. Thanks, everybody. We're going to head into the post game. We have a ton of sound. Kanye's in Africa. Food shortages in the UK with a Tory Brexit. Lots more to get to. This Sunday for the primer, and we might unlock it, Jean Bajelon and I, Jean Bajelon, we're doing an actual a breakdown of Bernie Sanders' foreign policy speech, because this actually was important. This is a real step in terms of structural foreign policy thinking, following up from the conversation with Daniel Bessner, which everybody should go back and check out. If you haven't yet, go to Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Share our clips. Subscribe. We're growing that. Become a patron today. It's time. Patreon.com/TMBS. Get the full experience, every shape and form. Thank you, David. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody, for watching, listening, sharing, and, of course, most importantly, for being patrons. Thanks, everybody.